You know, at the United Nations, words aren't just words, they're practically weapons. And recently, the main chamber turned into a battlefield over a single, absolutely explosive proposal about the future of Somaliland. It's a fight that pits old, painful grievances against the very foundations of international law. So let's dive into what lit the fuse on this diplomatic firestorm.
Wow. It doesn't get much more raw than that, does it? This quote from Somalia's representative just perfectly captures the pure anger in the room. This is so much more than a simple diplomatic disagreement. For Somalia, this is a deep personal insult. It really sets the stage for the intense clash we're about to explore.
So, what could possibly trigger a confrontation like that? What was the one announcement that set everything off? Well, it all started right here. And there it is. Israel stood up and announced its plan to formally recognize Somaliland. Now, this is a region that sees itself as a totally independent state, but for the rest of the world, it's officially part of Somalia. This one move triggered a massive chain reaction, forcing countries all over the globe to pick a side in a conflict that's been simmering for decades.
So, you have to ask, why would Israel make such a controversial move? Well, from their point of view, it isn't controversial at all. Let's take a look at how they build their case, which they say is built on a solid foundation of history and international law. This statement is really the core of Israel's entire argument. They're saying, look, we're not trying to break up Somalia. Instead, they claim they're just acknowledging what's been plain to see for over 30 years. Somaliland is already acting like an independent, fully functioning state. And a huge part of Israel's argument comes down to this specific bit of history. They point all the way back to 1960. For a few days, Somaliland was an independent nation, recognized by dozens of other countries, before it chose to voluntarily join with Somalia. So when the Somali government fell apart in 1991, Israel argues that Somaliland wasn't seceding, it was just taking back the sovereignty it had in the first place. But it's not just about history. Israel also brought a legal argument to the table, and it's based on something called the Montevideo Convention. It lays out 4 basic rules for what makes a state. You need a permanent population, a defined territory, an effective government, and the ability to have foreign relations. Israel's representative basically said that for over 30 years, Somaliland has checked every single one of those boxes. And this is where we get to the moral part of Israel's case. They frame Somaliland's push for independence as a direct result of horrific violence back in the late 1980s under the former Somali regime, which targeted the Izak clan. By using the words Izak genocide, they're positioning Somaliland's sovereignty as not just a political move, but as a matter of human rights.
Well, as you can probably imagine, the government of Somalia sees this whole story very, very differently. Their response was immediate, it was passionate, and it was a total and complete rejection of Israel's entire case.
And this right here shows you just how massive the divide is. Where Israel sees a genocide, Somalia sees a tragic civil war that they say was funded and fueled by outside forces. Where Israel sees a distinct, separate Somaliland, Somalia sees one indivisible nation, one people, one religion, one country. I mean, these two stories just can't exist in the same reality.
This quote really just cuts right to the bone of Somalia's position. It's not a simple disagreement over historical facts. It's them saying Israel has no right to even talk about their history. They're painting Israel as an outsider, just making up a story to push its own political agenda.
So Somalia's response comes from a few different angles. First, they call out what they see as Israeli hypocrisy, pointing to its actions in Gaza. They also push back on the facts on the ground, saying Somaliland isn't even unified, with large areas still loyal to Somalia. In the end, they see this as nothing less than an act of aggression designed to break their country apart. And they've made it clear, any deal recognizing a so-called Somaliland is completely null and void.
Now, this conflict didn't stay between Israel and Somalia for long. The rest of Africa and other major international groups started to weigh in, and they did it with an almost perfectly unified voice, all based on one single core principle. To really get the African position, you have to understand this one crucial idea. The African Union is built on the belief that the borders drawn during the colonial era, no matter how messy or imperfect they are, have to be respected. Why? To prevent endless wars over territory. Recognizing Somaliland could completely shatter this cornerstone of stability on the continent.
And because of that principle, the opposition to Israel's proposal was absolutely overwhelming. It wasn't just the African Union. You had major regional powers like Egypt. You had the Arab League, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. They all lined up right behind Somalia, strongly condemning Israel's move.
So, in the middle of all this, you might be wondering, what about the United States? Well, their position was pretty simple. Careful neutrality. They just put out a statement saying there's been no change in American policy. Basically, they took a step back from the whole thing and decided not to back Israel's move.
Okay, so we've heard the fiery speeches, the complex legal arguments, the history lessons. But what is this really all about? Let's boil this whole thing down to the core ideas that are clashing on the world stage.
When you strip everything else away, it really comes down to this classic, fundamental dilemma in international law. On one side, you have the right to self-determination, this idea that people should be free to choose their own destiny. But on the other side, you have territorial integrity, the principle that a nation's borders are sacred and shouldn't be broken apart by outside forces. In this case, these two incredibly powerful ideas are in a head-on collision. And that leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? Israel is arguing that recognizing the reality of Somaliland will actually create stability in the region, but Somalia and its powerful allies, they fear the exact opposite. They worry it would set a dangerous precedent, one that could encourage separatist movements all across Africa and open a Pandora's box of new conflicts. So, what do you think?